This is where I get to make my plug for the Media Standards Trust, which in fact was set up precisely for those sorts of purposes about raising standards or maintaining standards in journalism and really seeking to have much greater public debate about those issues. And I hope journalists in the audience will join up with Journalisted and actually make itself aware of some of the work of the Media Standards Trust. Can I now turn to you, Zoe, because you have a story to tell, and it might be interesting for the jury to hear.
Out of this panel, I am absolutely the least knowledgeable about libel law. In fact, a year ago, I didn't really know very much about libel at all. What I did know was what I read in newspapers, the Simons case, which I absolutely supported him 100%. I signed up to every reform libel campaign and petition that I could, because I fundamentally believe that the situation with libel in this country is wrong, it's incorrect, it suppresses free speech, and I think journalists and scientists are being very, very restricted by it. So I knew that was my position on it, and I still have to say I stand by that. But in March last year, on the eve of publication of my second book, I was libelled by a national newspaper, and it totally threw me personally into a situation I never expected to be in, which was having to face the sort of reality: do I defend my professional background, my personal life, and my credibility and my reputation, or do I ignore the fact that this has happened and try and get on with it? And I couldn't. So I'll explain what happened and why I sort of came to the position of having to sue the Independent on Sunday. I wrote an article for them on the eve of publication of my second book, and it was explaining about my experience of writing about sex and sexuality and how it was very important to me as a writer to be able to strongly show that writing about sex and sexuality is not the same as working in the sex industry. And the headline that they gave my piece was, and I quote, "I was a hooker and now I'm an agony aunt." And yes, I mean, it would be funnier if it wasn't so absolutely incorrect and devastating to my reputation. Not only because it was insulting for me, because it was incorrect, but because my entire writing career is based on the fact that I've tried to differentiate the conflation between sex and the sex industry. Female sexuality and sexual identity and agency is very separate to selling it for a profit. So I didn't realise just how widespread this libel had become. But with the age of the web, and as Kevin said, once you're libelled on the web, you are libelled forever. I suddenly got Google alerts on my name. All writers have Google news alerts on their names because we're all egotists. And all the news alerts started coming up from all over the world with this headline, because the newspaper had not only gone to print with the headline, but it had been sent via our RSS, which is really simple syndication. It's a very quick way of pushing news headlines out over the web, and syndicated all over the globe with this particular article to hundreds, if not thousands, or potentially more sites and sources. And suddenly, from a Google page, which you would see about my background as a writer and as an author, and my achievements, it was Zoe Margolis, I was a hooker, and now I'm an agony aunt. And it was first person, it was me claiming that these things about me, and it was absolutely devastating. And I didn't know what to do, and people started giving me advice, and they said the best thing you can do is nip this in the bud, try and end it, and you've got to get an apology, and you've got to get it as public as possible. Now, because my background is as a blogger, and I'm somewhat of a geek and a nerd, I realised that Google ranking is incredibly important, and that a little apology printed on, I think it was page 47 on the inside seam of the Independent on Sunday, where the apology finally came out, would not do anything to change that first page on Google. It would still appear with me, my name, saying I was a prostitute. And all I could do was try and replace that with more important, more substantial news sources. And the way of doing that, I realised, was to sue the Independent, to take it to court, to try and get as much publicity and media attention around that as possible. And that in turn would push all of the libel much, much further down Google. So we for a few months, we went through the process. I was represented by Simons Muirhead Burton, who Razi is a part of. And I did it on a conditional fee agreement because I couldn't afford the libel fees. I was gobsmacked by how much it was going to cost. And they very kindly agreed to take it on because the risk factors that we looked at showed that I had quite a good chance of getting it settled, or at least winning, hopefully, if it did get to court. The process was 2.5 months long, and it was the most stressful time I have ever had in my entire life. It was horrible. I can't imagine what it must have been like for Simon Singh to defend a case when I was a claimant and found it utterly, utterly stressful. I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was on the edge of a breakdown. It was really, really horrible. But I fundamentally believed that I had to get this as public as possible so that I could defend my reputation, and especially my professional reputation and my credibility. So eventually we did agree that they had defamed me, and they agreed to settle with some damages. But more importantly, they agreed to a statement in open court. So I got a day in court, which was publicised by thousands and thousands of people on Twitter and on various blogs and in various news sources. I was interviewed on television, radio, etc. And that has now stopped the libel from appearing. I think it's probably on the 9th or 10th page of Google, and everything you now see is about me being a writer or is about me fighting this legal battle and winning it. So my story really is about the success of libel, I suppose, but also my concern that with libel reform, I worry that people who might be in my position, who are having to defend themselves against a big media organisation or a big corporate company, for that matter, can't afford to access this, that can't afford to challenge it. I was very lucky that my lawyers agreed to do it on a CFA, and that was because I'm assuming that the win fee that they would get back would be substantial enough for them if it did go to court, for the risk to be worth weighing up those costs. But if we don't have CFAs, or if access to actually defending your reputation for individuals like myself is removed, I worry that we won't be in a better position if reform happens. We'll be in a worse one. But overall, I think we really, really do need reform. I just want to make sure there's fair, just and equal access for the person on the street, not big corporations.